The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear sisters, Jazakumullah khairan for gathering here today with us on a Saturday morning. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. Welcome to our session of Social Justice Roadmap. And today is going to be our third session of the 6 transformational sessions that we have offered for this course. Alhamdulillah. Social justice, sisters, is at the core of a just and healthy society. And it's greatly advocated for by Islam and its teachings. But many times, due to our lack of unawareness, leads to injustices in our social setup. So inshallah, in today's session, we will be discussing our constitutional rights, which will include freedom of speech and freedom of religion as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, day-to-day scenarios where our rights may be violated, and the steps to understanding our rights. And furthermore, inshallah, today our speaker is Sister Samira El-Hosri. She is from Dallas, Texas. She's a civil litigator who is passionate about helping others get justice, mashallah. She completed her law degree in 2021 at the American University Washington College of Law. And she's a Bachelor of Arts from George Washington University. She also has a Master's of Arts in International Affairs from American University as part of the dual JD MA degree program. So inshallah, before I invite Sister Samira over, just go through a few rules. Dear sisters, we will be taking your questions at the end of the session. Please write down your questions in the chat box. And we would appreciate if whatever you write is related to the topic. Also, please do not write unnecessary greetings or unnecessary chat box. Jazakumullah khairan for understanding. So, Sister Samira, I would like to invite you to come over and begin your presentation.
Thank you, Sister. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Like they said, my name is Samira El-Hosri. I'm a civil litigation staff attorney at the Muslim Legal Fund of America. I've been in this role for about 2 years at MLFA, and my work primarily focuses on, so at MLFA, we focus on issues that affect the American Muslim community. And so issues of free speech and freedom of religion are something that we deal with every day. So hopefully I can give everyone some helpful information about, your rights as protected by the Constitution, and, what rights you do have, what rights you don't have, and what you can do to protect yourself. And before I start, just wanted to preface that this presentation is for educational purposes, and if you have any specific questions about like a specific case or fact related to something that happened to you, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney and get help that way, because I can't cover, unfortunately, everything, especially with everything that's going on. So this is going to be kind of a broad overview. So to start, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, I'm sure many of you have heard what it covers. Basically, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which basically means the government can't create a state religion and it can't keep people from practicing their religion in the way that they want, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right to the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. So freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to protest, and freedom to bring issues to the government. And obviously these are all rights that are especially poignant right now with everything going on in the world, that are really important, especially to our Muslim community. It's important to mention from here that the First Amendment protects us from government interference and does not cover private actors. So private companies, private people, you're not necessarily protected not protected by the First Amendment from people trying to come attack your freedom of speech or freedom of religion, but you are protected from the government trying to do that, and that's the federal government or the state governments. So to start, freedom of speech. These are so freedom of speech is not unlimited. This is a list of things that is not protected by freedom of speech, and this is in person and online. So a few states, but not the federal government, prevent private discrimination based on political affiliation or lawful political activities. So that means if you express a political view about maybe you don't agree with what the government's doing, or you express some other political view, that's usually not protected speech under the First Amendment. So to kind of go through some of these here, so true threats, and these are sort of things that in our work at MLFA that we've seen sort of the Muslim community deal with, and we've had cases and clients who've faced some of these issues. So to start, true threats is speech that frightens or intimidates a specific person or a specific group of people into believing they will be seriously harmed. And this is something at MLFA we've seen in our criminal defense department, where Muslims have been targeted by the government for making threats like these, either online or in person. And true threats under this definition are not protected speech. So you can get in trouble for speech like that. Incitement to violence, speech that calls for or incites imminent lawless action. So basically, if you make a speech saying, I basically call for someone to do a crime, basically call for something criminal to happen, that is something that you could get in trouble for, is not protected by freedom of speech. Hate speech, public speech that expresses hate or encourages violence towards a person or group based on something such as race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. So if someone is calling for, attack on Muslims or attack on Arabs or attack on South Asians or attack on any group, That's not protected by the First Amendment, and that's the kind of thing that you can report and have dealt with, because that's not covered by free speech. So if somebody is saying something along those lines, and they say, oh, well, that's my free speech, that's not true, because hate speech isn't covered. And then to get towards something that we've been seeing a lot with what's going on in Gaza and Israel right now is material support. So as I'm sure many of you know, Hamas is designated as a terrorist group by the U.S. government. And there are several other terrorist groups that are designated terrorist groups by the U.S. government. And even intangible support like speech is not protected and can get, we've seen clients who have gotten in trouble under this for even posting a link in a group chat that the government said, is intangible support for Hamas. And so speech like that is not protected. And then I know many in our community are dealing with immigration issues, and speech is particularly difficult in the immigration sense because the government has, so I'm going to preface this with, I'm not an immigration attorney. We have an immigration department at U.S.A, and I consulted with them in making this presentation, but I'm not 100% on immigration law, but there are terrorism-related inadmissibility grounds. And that's where the immigration system will, decide that maybe somebody isn't admissible because they've said something online that the government has decided is in support of terrorism. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a designated group. We've seen this happen with a lot of our clients. Unfortunately, it's pretty vague, and that's something that we're challenging. But that's something to keep in mind, I think, if you're dealing with immigration consequences, is that it doesn't have to necessarily be illegal speech to end up being inadmissibility grounds. So next, your rights while protesting. So you're protected under the First Amendment from government interference with protests. And there are some limits. So first I would say, consider the backlash. Like I've mentioned a couple times, the First Amendment doesn't protect you, federal law doesn't protect you from private action. So I know we've seen a lot of these instances where people have been speaking up and they've been losing their jobs. And unfortunately, there's limited federal protection for those situations, because if it's a private employer, then it's their free speech to be able to hire and fire who they want. So consider, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use their right to protest, they obviously should, but obviously people are in different economic situations, different situations in their lives, and so consider before you protest or go out, post something online, just think that there's not always going to be 100% protection. In some states that's different. In some states there are laws that are protecting against private discrimination, but that's a state-by-state issue, so I can't really cover that all right now. So second, I would say do your homework before you go protest. Look up where you're going, look up if there are any requirements for permits or other things in order to protest somewhere, if it's a public space or a private space. The government is allowed to limit based on non-speech limitations. So basically they're allowed to say, you're not allowed to protest on the State House grounds on Tuesdays, but they're not allowed to say you're not allowed to protest on the State House grounds for Palestine. So there are some limitations, so definitely look up what those are and how you just make sure that you're staying within those grounds. Don't take the bait. So violence obviously isn't protected speech, and I know we're seeing a lot of people who are being counter protested and trying to rile people up, and obviously just don't let people. I mean, if you're in danger or you feel like you're going to be harmed, you have a right to defend yourself, but violence is never going to be protected speech. So don't take the bait. Finally, we recommend you make a communication plan with someone who isn't going to the protest. So somebody should know where you're going, when you expect to come back, and be in contact with them. Maybe say like, I'll text you every hour. And that's just a good way to stay safe while protesting and make sure that your rights are protected. Next, donating safely. And I know this is also a big issue that people are worrying about right now, especially we want to be able to send aid to the people in Gaza or other people across the world who are in need of aid. And unfortunately, at MLFA, we've seen instances of this where we've had clients who, they understood that they were donating money to widows and orphans, and the government ended up prosecuting them for material support to terrorism. And so to keep yourself out of any trouble, we recommend that you donate to charities that meet all of the following. And to specify, donating and giving money is part of free speech. So you have a right to donate without fear, but there are some limitations. So donate to charities that meet all of the following criteria. They're based in the U.S. They're registered charity, 501c3, means that they're a nonprofit organization. And the charity has a license or permission to provide aid in Gaza or has previously advertised projects in Gaza. And I'm using that obviously as an example because that's something that's really prominent in our minds right now. But there have been instances, obviously, donating money to Somalia or donating money to Lebanon. Like there's lots of places where we've seen this come up. Syria has been a big one. And if you are wondering about an organization, we recommend that you check their website, and they should have on there that they're registered 501c3. You should be able to see their documentation, and they should be advertising that they have licenses to operate in these specific areas where you want to be able to donate money. And if you can't find that on their website, we recommend you call and ask and just be double, triple, quadruple safe before you give money to any organization. Right now, we're recommending that you do not donate money to individuals through direct PayPal donations, to unknown persons, or to international charities that might be under different regulations than the U.S. So they meet all the regulations of the country that they operate out of, but it can still end up getting you in trouble in the U.S. if it doesn't meet all of the requirements of the U.S. licenses to operate in certain areas. Unfortunately, not sending money to individuals even means your family members. If you have a family member who says, send me this money and I'm gonna go give it to people in need in my community. And I'm not saying this is all the time in all the places, but we're seeing this a lot now in Gaza, where people have been collecting money to send to individual people, and that can be really dangerous because the government believes that if even an individual member of a terrorist organization receives benefit, then you can still be in trouble for material support to terrorist organizations, unfortunately. Sorry, I feel like I'm being I'm very negative, but I just want to make sure everyone is like staying safe and understanding, you know, what you can and can't do. And then with unknown persons, we've seen at MLFA, you know, people going and saying, I'm collecting money for this, and people will send them money, and then they're fraudulent. They're not really collecting the money that they say they're collecting, or using it for what they say they're using it for. So donate to charities that meet all of these criteria that are up here, and you'll definitely be more on the safe side. So more generally, your rights while traveling. And I know this is something that our community deals with a lot, and it's something that I have worked on a lot in my work. So to start, the watch list and the no-fly list. I know this is something that we talk about a lot. What are the watch lists and the no-fly list, and how do you know if you're on it? So basically, the watch list, I know a lot of people have dealt with secondary screening, and one of the indicators that we see is if somebody is referred to secondary screening pretty much every time they fly, or if you've ever seen 4 S's on your boarding pass, stands for secondary screening, secondary security screening selection. And that is often an indicator that someone is on a watch list. The no-fly list, you're going to find out that you're on the no-fly list if you try to get on a plane and you're not allowed to get on a plane. What happens if you suspect you're on the watch list, or you find out that you're not allowed to board a plane? What the government says to do is to apply for, to submit a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Traveler Redress Inquiry Program complaint. And DHS TRIP is the acronym. And once you do that, if you are a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident on the no-fly list, the government is required to tell you that you are on the no-fly list and give you an unclassified summary of the reasons why. And then you're allowed to challenge that unclassified summary. Unfortunately, if you are on the watch list, the government will neither confirm nor deny whether anybody is on the watch list. And so if you do one of these DHS TRIP complaints, which we recommend that you do, you'll get kind of a non-committal letter that will say, you know, we've reviewed your complaint, we've made any changes that we need to make in our system, and this concludes your complaint. And they claim, you know, national security concerns, but the government will neither confirm nor deny whether anyone is actually on a watch list. But there's some ways, like I mentioned earlier, getting screened every time you fly or every time you cross the border. We can kind of assume that that might be the situation. So secondary screening, law enforcement is allowed to stop and question you and search your things at an airport or a border crossing. You are required to answer questions that might appear on a basic customs form, like where were you traveling, who were you with, how much money do you have? Those kinds of questions the government is allowed to ask. And we recommend that you do answer those questions. But if it goes beyond that, they start asking you about your religion, they start asking you about your family. We recommend that you say, you know, I'm happy to answer these questions, but with an attorney present. We don't recommend you ever say, you know, I'll never answer these questions, or I'm not going to answer these questions. We recommend you say something along the lines of, I'm happy to answer these questions, but with an attorney present. And then don't give any more information until you're able to schedule a time, maybe with an attorney, to go speak with these law enforcement officers. Unlocking your phone, a lot of times TSA agents or CBP agents will ask you to unlock your phone. You're not required to unlock your phone for them. And they'll maybe say something along the lines of like, this will go faster if you unlock it. But it's within your right to say, you know, I'm not going to unlock my phone. But if you do refuse to unlock your phone, the government is allowed to seize your phone and keep it for review for a period of time I believe it's like 6 to 8 weeks, and that is allowed, but you don't have to unlock your phone there with them if you don't want to do that. You know, all of this being said, we recommend if you are traveling and you're stopped for questioning that you remain kind, remain polite, answer the questions that I went over, basically basic customs questions. And starting a fight or arguing will only extend your time in questioning. So, and just don't give them a reason to become any more suspicious. Stay kind, polite, and things will definitely go a lot faster. So now, I'm trying to speed through this. I realize I have a lot more than I thought I did. Your rights in the workplace. So federal laws most apply to workplaces of 15 or more employees. So these are things like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which protect you from discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex/gender, or national origin. And so businesses employers with 15 or more employees cannot discriminate under the federal laws for those reasons: race, color, religion, gender, national origin. There's also the Americans with Disabilities Act, which protects individuals with disabilities from discrimination in the workplace. The Age Discrimination Act, which protects older people from discrimination. And then the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects you from discrimination based on your medical history or your family's medical history. And these are just some of the federal laws that protect people from discrimination in the workplace. And there are also local anti-discrimination laws that differ, from state to state, and that may protect more or less than federal laws. And these might apply to businesses that are maybe smaller than 15 employees. So state law varies, but federal law is basically what I already went over. So we definitely recommend that you know your workplace's policies and reporting procedures. Read those handbooks that you're given that go over what the workplace's discrimination policy, and if your workplace doesn't have a discrimination policy, it's definitely a good thing to maybe speak to HR or speak about getting a discrimination policy put in place in your workplace. But definitely know your rights based on those policies and who you should go to if there's an issue in the workplace. And then as far as accommodations, religious accommodations in the workplace, a workplace that's covered by federal law must reasonably accommodate sincerely held religious belief unless the accommodation imposes an undue hardship. So with our Muslim clients, if somebody wants 2 or 3 breaks in the day to go pray, they want a break on Fridays to go to Jummah, those are some of the things you can ask for, and your employer is required to accommodate those unless it imposes an undue hardship. And that's a pretty high burden that they have to show, that it'll be really harmful for their business to be able to accommodate you. The employer does not have to give you the exact accommodation you request, but they must work with you to find a solution. And they also can't say, like, you take this or you get nothing. It's a back and forth process in finding accommodations for your sincerely held religious beliefs. So for example, we have a client who wanted to go on Fridays to go to Jummah, and he asked to maybe come in an hour early on Fridays, or basically he has to come out an hour early Fridays, and his employer refused that and said, no, you have to use your unpaid time to go if you want to go have that break. And that's not allowed. The employer needed to work with him to figure out, like, what's a way that he could go 30 minutes, maximum an hour, the place he wanted to go pray was across the street from his workplace, so it was sort of it was a pretty simple accommodation that they could have worked with him to come up with, and ultimately we were able to help him get that accommodation. But for fact-specific questions, we definitely recommend you reach out to an attorney if you're having problems with accommodations or religious discrimination in the workplace, and get very specific help with your situation. Your rights at school. So federal law, as I said, only protects against government actors or institutions that receive government funds. So basically public schools, public universities, or if it's a private university and maybe they receive a government grant for a specific program. So maybe the sports teams receive a government grant. That will be covered by federal law. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act protects against discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. I'll point out here that it does not cover discrimination based on religion. So if you're discriminated against based on your race, your national origin, or your color, that's something that you can bring under federal law. Religion, unfortunately, is not something that's covered by federal law in schools. And then Title IX of the Civil Rights Act prohibits sex-based discrimination. So discrimination maybe in the ways that like a women's soccer team is treated versus a men's soccer team. That's protected under federal law. Again, different states have different policies, different laws that might be more or less protective than federal law. It really depends on your state. Again, like in the workplace, we recommend that you know your school's institution, your school's policies and reporting procedures. So read the anti-discrimination policy, read those handbooks that you get, if you're going to college, those orientation materials, because they'll have that information for you to know what the school protects and how to report instances of discrimination. And then look at your institution's past behaviors on free speech. How did it react to people kneeling during the national anthem, perhaps flag or book burning, or even older protests, if applicable, going back to, like Vietnam War protests. And if you're being treated differently than the school has acted in the past, that could possibly be a grounds for a discrimination claim. But again, I'll say this one more time. For fact-specific questions, definitely reach out to an attorney that can, analyze your local law, analyze your specific situation, and see if you have a possible case. This is my last slide. Rights when speaking to a law enforcement officer. We recommend that if you are approached by a law enforcement officer, you ask for an attorney to be present before you answer any questions. That is absolutely 100% your right to have an attorney present before you answer any questions to law enforcement. Law enforcement officers can lie to you. It's not against the law for them to lie to you, and often they will lie to you. But law enforcement officers cannot lie to your attorney. And this probably seems very obvious to people, but the FBI is included in law enforcement. I mean, we've seen instances where we've said, ask for an attorney before you speak to law enforcement. And then we've had clients say, oh, I just spoke with the FBI. I'm like, no, the FBI is law enforcement. Before, if you're approached by any law enforcement, if you're 100% within your right to say, I will not be answering any questions without my attorney, and then wait until you're able to organize a time, for your attorney and you to go meet with the law enforcement officers. And this is one thing that I've heard a couple times in my workplace. You can't talk yourself out of a problem, but you can absolutely talk yourself into a problem. So it's safer, easier, if you say, I would like to wait for my attorney to be present. Okay, and my last slide. For fact-specific questions, like I said, speak to an attorney. And And you can apply for help from MLFA at this link that's showing on the screen, mlfa.org/apply-for-help. And then we also have collected some materials specifically related to issues that we've seen around Gaza, donations, protesting, a lot of the things I went over today. We've collected a lot of those resources on our website and some videos from other of our attorneys. And you can access those at mlfa.org/Gaza/education/series. And then finally, that's my email. I would say if you are looking for, legal assistance, the fastest way is to go and apply for help. But that's my email if you want to reach out to me. And with that, I think I am a little over time, so we can go ahead and get questions.
All right, Jazakumullah khairan. MashaAllah, beautiful presentation. A lot of information to soak in, alhamdulillah, but very useful information, alhamdulillah. So, according to one wise person, striving for social justice is the most valuable thing to do in life. And that's, by the way, Albert Einstein, alhamdulillah. So sisters, we will be checking your questions now. And if you would be kind enough to post them in the chat box, inshallah. Also, let me see. All right. So regarding like a legitimate organizations where you want to send your donation, as you all are aware, we have HHRD, which is a 501c3 organization, and it's an international relief agency of ICNA, and it's completely safe and reliable. And obviously, please go ahead, donate. A link has been posted, and inshallah, please go ahead and donate on that link, inshallah. And so there's this question by a sister. Does the government provide an attorney, or we need to find one and pay for it?
So in criminal prosecution, so if you're charged with a crime, you do have a right to an attorney. And so if you don't have an attorney in that situation, you can get, the government will provide you with a public defender who will defend you. In civil situations, which is what I deal with, basically you feel like you've been discriminated and you want to sue your school, you want to sue your workplace, something along those lines. That's the kind of situation where you would have to seek out an attorney on your own. And there are free and low cost attorneys available. So at MLFA, we are completely pro bono. So our clients don't have to pay for our services because we're funded by donations from the community. And there are lots of other organizations like that. There's usually a legal aid organization in each state and then each different community that will cover certain issues that you can go to, and that will either be free or low cost. You can also look at your local universities, because there will be learning clinics where able to train students that are in law school. They will work with like their supervisor, and then they'll take on cases for free or low cost. Yeah, so there's definitely free or low cost options out there if you want to bring a civil case. But you can also, hire a private attorney and pay for a private attorney. But
Okay.
yeah.
And so Sister Najia has asked, are they allowed to ask these questions under law, like religion related stuff, etc.?
Yes. So if you're stopped and questioned, if you're traveling, or if the law enforcement comes to your home, they are allowed to ask you questions about your religion, but they're not allowed to discriminate against you because of your religion. So they're not allowed to say, basically you're not allowed to bring sorry, my cat is getting in my way. Excuse me. Yeah, so the law enforcement is allowed to ask you these questions, but it's well within your right to not answer. It's well within your right to say that I'm not going to answer till I have an attorney. But I guess that's the short version, is that it is allowed.
Okay, so there's a question which saying, how can we help to add religion in federal discrimination list?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I would say, advocate, call your local representatives, find local organizations that are working on this advocacy. Groups like CARE, groups like Muslim Advocates who do, this advocacy work on Capitol Hill or in local state governments. Get involved. Definitely vote. I would always say vote, and find these organizations that are working on it, and donate your time, and that's always a good thing.
All right, so sisters, Nadia mentioned, where do we find an attorney when we get stopped at the airport?
So in that situation, if you're stopped in the airport, they are allowed to stop and question you, but if you're not, under arrest for a crime, they can't keep you there. And so if you're being questioned and you are uncomfortable with their questions, you can just say, I'm not going to answer any further questions without an attorney. And at that point, if you're not under arrest for a crime, once they've finished whatever investigation or review they want to do, they have to let you go. So at that point, you can get their information, go home, reach out to an attorney, and if they want to follow up, schedule time to follow up with those agencies. But I think more often than not, they're not going to follow up once you say, I'm not going to answer any of these questions until I have an attorney. So you're not looking for an attorney when you're in the airport, because they can't keep you there unless you've been arrested for a crime. So.
All right, great. And there's another question by Sister Samia. She's saying, if I'm not a U.S. citizen, can we sign petitions?
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this again with, I'm not an immigration attorney. And so for specific instances, specific questions about petitions you want to sign, I would definitely say reach out to an immigration attorney. But what I was saying earlier about the terrorism related inadmissibility grounds, you do have the free speech rights in the United States to advocate, to sign petitions. You absolutely have that right as a non-citizen. But what I've heard from my colleagues is, just consider that when you're going through the immigration process, that it might be something that the government finds you inadmissible for, which obviously isn't fair, but it is something I think that non-citizens have to consider that American citizens don't have to consider, unfortunately. So yes, you do have that right, but just consider what the implications might be. And again, speak to an immigration attorney about this, because I am not I am not one, so I don't want to give anyone specific advice on specific issues and specific petition.
Yeah, thank you for explaining. So there's another question that says, any legality attached if one holds any gatherings at home for education, awareness regarding current Gaza-Israel conflict?
Yeah, I mean, so speaking in your home and having a gathering, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal about, teaching your friends, or, coming together. I know people have been coming together to, support each other. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. What becomes a problem is, specifically, and I know no one in our community is doing this, but specifically if you, are coming together to, support Hamas or support some other terrorist organization. Obviously, were the government to find out about that, that would be illegal. Um, but in terms of, education, learning, meeting with your friends, there's nothing wrong with that.
So what falls under supporting Hamas? That's the question.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so there's a lot of it's the government loves to be very vague. So basically what we've seen in our clients is basically what's called a material support to terrorism charge. Um, and that will be anything from posting online, supporting, saying like Hamas is great, everyone should go support them, or raising money to send to, like, you're saying like I'm raising money to send to Hamas, or posting maybe like resources like, oh, here's how you can go, even if you even post resources like, oh, here's how you can go send money to a designated terrorist group. That can also be considered material support. So just, yeah, it's those sorts of things. I mean, if you're just saying like, I know we've seen a lot of fear where people have said like, oh, if you're pro-Palestine, you're pro-Hamas, and we obviously know that's not true. And so obviously don't be afraid that if you're supporting Palestine, you're going to get arrested, you're going to get hit with the material support charge. But do be very careful about, what you're sharing, what kind of languages you're using, not like in terms of like English or a different language, but like saying like, oh, Hamas isn't that bad, like they're trying to free Palestine, that sort of language can get you in trouble. And then, yeah, like where you're donating, where you're sending money.
Yeah,
Just be very careful and be like really informed and make sure you're very informed about what you're sharing, what you're donating to, and just kind of how you're putting things out into the world.
so basically just leave out all the conversation regarding Hamas, right?
Yeah, just honestly, be safe.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay. So Sister Samara is asking, what about KTN number? Does it help in smooth screening at the airport?
So that's the known traveler number. So that's if you have pre-check or global entry. It can. So things like pre-check and global entry are basically privileges, extras. You don't have a right to those privileges. So, we've had cases where people have come to us and said, I had global entry, and then the FBI came and talked to me about something, and now they took my global entry. What can I do? Unfortunately, you can't do anything because there's no right to having global entry. But we will say that if you have, global entry or pre-check, that, you're not going to get those privileges if, you're on a watch list or you're otherwise, like the government otherwise suspects you. They're not going to give you those specific privileges. So it can, but it's not a guarantee of any like smooth traveling if you have global entry or pre-check.
All right. So there's another question that says, what are the steps that one can take if verbally harassed being a Muslim publicly?
Right. Oh, I definitely meant to say this earlier. If you feel like you are unsafe or you are being threatened, don't hesitate to call the police, call 911. Even if you are not a U.S. citizen, whatever your immigration status, you are protected from crime. So if you feel like you're unsafe, get yourself to a safe situation to the extent that you can. and feel free, like don't hesitate to ask to call for help. And if it's in your workplace or in your school, just know where you can go report those things. Yeah, that's what I would say. I just would say, get yourself into a safe situation and don't be afraid to, call 911 or call for help if you feel like you're in danger.
Okay, so there's another question by Sister Fazia, and she asks, can we post things for support Palestine without being in trouble?
Absolutely. You can absolutely show your support for Palestine, and you can absolutely, share whatever you want, however you're feeling. The line is where you start sharing support for designated terrorist organizations. And if you Google, like, U.S. designated terrorist organization, there's a list. I know I've been talking about like Hamas and Gaza because that's what's like front of everyone's mind right now. But there's nothing wrong with sharing your support for Palestine. And if you are criminally prosecuted or, you find yourself having some other bad repercussion for showing your support for Palestine, you have a right to defend. If you're criminally prosecuted, you have a right to your defense. If you have maybe lost your job or been kicked out of school or something along those lines, like that's the kind of situation where I would definitely say reach out to an attorney and see what they can do to help you and, within the laws of your state or your situation. But sharing support online or going to protests supporting Palestine or any other political statement is not illegal. That's definitely covered by free speech.
Okay, and if somebody stops you or some law enforcement, then maybe ask for their name and document everything, right? Like what questions they asked, what time they stopped you, what date it was, right? That would help.
Definitely document everything and then reach out to, an attorney, either a private attorney or, like I mentioned, legal aid or, there's besides MLFA, there's lots of Muslim organizations that, will help you and support you in figuring out what your next steps can be.
All right. So there's a question by Sister Samira, and she asks, do they have right to check our devices and our social media?
So there's two levels, I guess, of phone searches. Sometimes when you're stopped, I think I've had this happen to me where you're stopped at TSA and they'll swab your phone for whatever residue. That kind of like physical search is allowed, that the government is allowed to do. In order to do any deeper of a search, to go through your phone, to go through your social media, that's the kind of thing that they have to get additional permissions for. So like I said, you're not required to unlock your phone. And if you don't unlock your phone, the government will have to have a reason to seize your phone and seek additional permissions from like a search warrant or something in order to like open your phone and go through it. And they have to have a reason to do that. So if the government said, if you're stopped and they say, open your Twitter, let me look at it, you can say no. They don't have a right to do that without a search warrant. But in terms of like physically like swabbing your phone or like looking at what's immediately visible, that is allowed.
Okay, so another sister is asking, under your rights in the workplace, what does 15 plus employees means?
Sure. So if you work at a company that has 15 or more employees, they're covered by Let me find the exact number before I say this wrong. They're covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So that's the federal discrimination law that protects you from discrimination based on race, religion, national origin. If you work at a company that has, I don't know, if it's a very small company, has like 6 employees, those companies are not covered by federal law, federal anti-discrimination law, and they may be covered by state or local anti-discrimination laws. But Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the main federal anti-discrimination law, only applies to businesses, companies that have 15 or more employees. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. So, what would be the maximum, the minimum number of employees? I mean, for you're saying like small companies, right?
Yeah, so 15. Once you hit 15, then you're covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the federal discrimination laws.
All right. So
So
another
14 is
sister's
lesser.
asking. Okay, 14. All right. Another sister's asking, how can we repel these targets on us as a Muslim community that attempts to dehumanize us?
Oh man, that is a big question. I would say definitely support organizations that are, doing advocacy work, doing, advocacy, supporting the community. I know I've said a lot of things that you're not protected by doing, but I will specify, like, don't be afraid to speak out. If you see something online, don't be afraid to respond and say, I'm Muslim, and that's not what Islam says. That's not how my community is. And that's obviously 100% protected free speech. You know, speak out, get involved with organizations that are doing advocacy for the Muslim community. I'm going to say vote again. Please vote. And I mean, that's, I think, the best that we can all do, just sort of come together and support each other, and, stand up where we do see these injustices and, say that's not right. And hopefully things can get a little bit better.
Alhamdulillah. Mashallah, many questions. So another one is, are they allowed in their airport to put you in private room with your kids under 10 years old and then search you in front of your kids?
Unfortunately, they are. That is allowed. There, and I'm not 100% on what those policies are, so I'm not gonna like say. Let me make sure I'm not saying anything that's wrong. Yeah, I mean that is allowed, unfortunately. And they have limited rights to be able to stop and search people. And it's not fair. And if you think you've been discriminated against, definitely reach out to an attorney and say, yeah, basically figure out what those specific facts were, what kind of questions you were asked, and see if you have a possible claim. But that's the kind of thing that, unfortunately, I think that they are allowed to do.
Okay. So there's another question regarding like our workplace.
Okay.
Can our jobs discriminate against us for supporting Palestinians? A lot of after the Saturday event or the Saturday, the sad event,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of companies came forward and saying their support. So. Uh, I mean, I don't know how much it's legal to get involved in politics for these like private or public companies to be making such statements. And then employees, they might or would like to respond saying like we support Palestinians.
Right. So, like I said, so the First Amendment protects against public or government discrimination, public institutions. So that applies to both state and federal government. So if you are discriminated against because of your free speech, if it's not any of those things, I'll go back to the beginning. If it's not any of the things that are not protected speech, you have those rights to free speech when you work for the government or you work for a public institution. And I would definitely say reach out to an attorney about your specific instance, figure out if that is something that you can bring a claim on. What is more complicated is if you work for private companies, non-government entities. You have free speech to say, I support, I stand with Palestinians, I stand against, what's going on. But then, your employer has the freedom to say, I don't want to hire or employ people who have that opinion. And it's definitely very unfortunate that people are losing their jobs because they're trying to stand up for human rights. But some states and some even cities will have their own anti-discrimination laws that will protect those in those situations. So I'm gonna say it again, reach out to an attorney about your specific, situation if you find yourself in that position. But I would again say, like, don't be afraid of making your opinion known. Like if you feel like if your employer has maybe sent an email out saying something you disagree with, you have the right to respond as long as you don't go beyond what's protected speech into these areas that are like, hate speech, fighting, those things like that. You have the right to say what you believe. But I will say that you have to consider, it is something that a lot of people have to consider, maybe if they're not in a position to lose their job or other implications. So
maybe look at their like local laws and their state laws before they go ahead with
yeah,
some.
definitely. Yeah. Look into your local laws, look into your company's policies. And also, like I said, look into, how maybe your company has treated things in the past. So maybe if somebody expressed an opinion that disagreed with the company in the past and they didn't have any repercussions, but you find yourself, having consequences, that might be something that you can bring a claim on. So it really depends on the situation.
Okay, so I'll be taking the last question, and this is a very recurring question, and people are asking, if someone is a government employee, can they participate in a protest and share things on social media in support of Palestine?
I know it. So I don't want to give you any specific like a yes or no answer, because I think it differs depending on what level of government employee that you are, and whether you do it, in your private capacity or your capacity as an employee. So I think in that situation, I would, again, read your policies. If you feel comfortable, maybe reach out to your supervisor and see, you can go over, I want to go to this protest. Is that something that would be allowed? And, figure out what your specific individual workplace's policy is. But, in terms of free speech, that's something that obviously going to protests and signing petitions is covered. So, yeah.
So, I'm sorry, this is the last question. Why
Okay.
isn't religion protected under federal law in public schools if freedom of religion is guaranteed in the Constitution? That's like a very valid point.
That's a big question. I don't know. I wish it was. Um, you know, I guess that's just how the statute was written back then. And I don't really know a good answer to that. I'm sorry.
All right. So, like, I have a question regarding if we are going to the, protest, or we're outside. Obviously, a lot of us, like, can be identified as Muslim,
Mhm.
Muslim females because of our outfits, hijabs, and etc. So, if somebody approaches you, or you're at a protest, and like a media person approaches you, and a lot of times I'm seeing, like, this very common theme, or the common question when they come: do you condemn this? Like,
Mhm.
it's not as simplistic as they make it, right? So do you condemn the Saturday event, or the strike, what happened,
Mhm.
right? And so what would be, or any other question, if they come and approach you, media or any other, what would be the best way to go about it and respond to this, or respond to them for any question?
Right. Um, hmm. I feel like I think that sort of depends.
Like, no comment.
Yeah,
The best policy, because like they take things and then they twist it around.
right. I mean, especially with law enforcement, I would
Mhm.
always say, don't speak to law enforcement without an attorney. Um, but in terms of media, that's really kind of up to you and what you're comfortable doing.
Mm.
Um, you're perfectly within your rights to say no comment. I don't want to, that's not something that you want to talk about. Um, but yeah, I think it depends on, if you're comfortable speaking to media about these things, or if you're not, then don't. Um, but I wouldn't be afraid to share, um, how you feel, and to be a voice for the Muslim community, if you're comfortable doing that. You don't obviously have to, or have to not. It really depends on your level of comfort and what you want to say at that time, I guess.
Okay, and what would be a good resource where we can find a good Muslim attorney to represent ourselves?
Sure. So MLFA, we so not all of our attorneys are actually like Muslim, but we that's what we focus is on issues that help the Muslim community. Um, you can always reach out to us, and the web address is on the screen. CARE is a very good resource to reach out to, and they have local state offices um, that will sometimes have attorneys available. Um, and I believe there are, if you like research, Muslim attorneys, I've seen lists, of like Muslim attorneys in Texas. I've seen lists out there like that. Um, but I think, these big Muslim organizations that can, if they can't help you, point you in the right direction, um, are good starting points, I think.
All right, Jazakallah khairan, mashallah. It was such an amazing session, Sister
Oh,
Samira. And the questions you answered, they were on everybody's mind, especially with the current situation. Alhamdulillah, it's good to know that there are such organizations, and there are such people who are there, in terms of need, or where you can donate, or where you can go to. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. So inshallah, I'll be concluding today's session with a dua, inshallah. And inshallah. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to Sister Samira, and she pointed towards MLFA, CARE, and other organizations. If you are looking for attorneys, Muslim attorneys, inshallah. And I would again I would again remind you that HHRD is one authentic place, organization where you can donate, and your donations will go, inshallah. So inshallah, with this, let me conclude with a dua, a short dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Allah, we've gathered here for your sake and your sake alone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Muslim Ummah is going through a lot. Palestine is going through a lot. We in our hearts, though we are not there present in person, but our hearts also hurt and suffer for all the oppressed ones, especially for Palestine. So Allah, please, oh Allah, enable them to live a better life, enable them, give them their freedom. And Allah, they are oppressed, so please listen to their dua, accept their duas, accept our supplications, and enable us to help them out through supplications and whichever legal means possible we can, and alleviate their sufferings, and alleviate of all the sufferings of the oppressed people all over the world. May they be Muslims, may they not be may they not be Muslims also, because the dua of the oppressor is the one, oppressed is the one that directs, goes directly towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any blockage. And oh Allah, take care of the oppressor as you have done that in the past with the Pharaoh and other oppressing nations. So Allah, we make dua in front of you with our sincerest concerns and our sincerest emotion that you help all those oppressed, and especially the ones in the Palestine, and enable us to stand up for them and be on the right side of the history. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك آمين ثم آمين. Again, Jazakumullah khairan, to our speaker and dear sisters for attending today's session. And today's session was live, by the way. It was broadcasted on YouTube and Facebook. And inshallah, we will meet again for 3 more sessions, same day, Saturdays, and same time, inshallah. So see you next Saturday. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all of you.